Fire-type Pokemon, one of the starter trios and a quintessential piece of every trainer's team. Or is it? Sure, nearly every rival uses one and it's seen its fair share on Elite Four and Champion teams, but is the Fire-type actually that necessary as part of every strong team? Or is it possible that we've just been brainwashed by Big Fire? Well, today we're going to be evaluating the fire type in each game to answer the question once and for all. Are fire types really as important as we've been led to believe? Or is it a waste of a slot that another type could make better use of? Tell me, Charizard, are you a starter Pokemon because you're good, or are you good because you're a starter Pokemon? Generation 1. Red, blue, and yellow. Now, jumping straight into the Generation 1 games, this is a case where the fire-type brainwashing is in full effect. Generation 1 is the home of Charizard, possibly the most lobbied for Pokemon in the history of the franchise. The Charizard hype is especially impressive when you remember that Charmander starts off with a pretty bad performance. Now, the following gym leader, Lieutenant Surge, is electric, so this is a draw for the iconic Fire Lizard. But it's only after this fight where you even gain access to another potential fire Pokemon. If you're playing Pokemon Red, you can find a Growlithe on Route 7 and 8, while in Pokemon Blue, it's Vulpix. Also, if you're playing Yellow, you can head west of Celadon and find a Ponyta on Cycling Road. And also in every game, you can evolve Eevee into Flareon. And it's also at this point in the game where Fire-type finally sees its first good matchup. Just like your account will see a good matchup with our subscribe button, am I right? Now, on the plus side, fire types do resist all of Erica's grass moves, and that's not to be understated. But Erica also uses poison types, status, and even wrap, so this fight is by no means free for a fire type, especially because fire types can't even do much damage. At this point in the game, a caught Growlithe will only know the fire move Ember, Vulpix will know Ember, Ponyta will know Ember, and evolved Flareon, or Arcanine and Ninetales for that matter, also will only know Ember. And you guessed it, even your wannabe legendary Fire Lizard will only know Ember. So sure, a fire type will do fine here with 40 power Ember, but it's not really the big advantage that you might expect. Now up next, it's Poison Leader Koga. And sure, a Charizard or Arcanine that knows Dig does great here, but that has everything to do with the fact that they learn Dig and nothing to do with them as fire types. The same thing can be said for Sabrina, whose Pokemon have crazy high special defense. The only fire types that are good for this fight are Charizard, Flareon, and Arcanine because they have high physical attack. Now, Sabrina does also have a Venomoth, so I suppose this can be useful for fire types, but again, you're probably still using Ember here. And for most players, it's only in after beating Sabrina where you finally gain access to a better fire move. After beating Blaine, Flareon, Ninetales, Rapidash, and Arcanine can all be taught the one fire TM in the game, Fire Blast. Also, Charizard, probably around this time, will have finally learned Flamethrower. And oh, hey, look, it's just in time for the last gym leader who uses ground and rock type Pokemon. And if you thought the Elite Four was gonna go well for fire types, well, I have some very bad news for you. Now, at this point, you could also get Magmar and Moltres, which aren't really worth mentioning because they don't contribute anything that the other fire types weren't contributing. I'm sorry, my brain is just breaking at how bad the fire types are in Gen 1. And it's just about to get so much worse because Lorelei, the big ice type trainer, is more so a water type trainer. Literally only has one Pokemon that's weak to fire. Also in Gen 1, fire doesn't resist ice. So Pokemon like Charizard or Moltres is actually weak to ice moves. As for Bruno, fire lends no help against his Onix, while Agatha's specially defensive Gengars hurt the case for fire even more. Oh, and then there's Lance, who goes 5 for 5 on resisting fire moves. And sure, the champion will always have one Pokemon that is weak to fire, but as a whole, this team is very much built to withstand fire moves. So yeah, the Elite Four is actually probably more cruel for fire types than the early game. And in total, fire type Pokemon at their absolute best have super effective coverage against 6 of the 53 Pokemon in major fights throughout the game. And that is me being generous and not considering every single rival fight. So all in all, choosing the fire starter makes your early game a lot harder. Fire itself does very little throughout the rest of the game. And so the only redeeming quality I can think of for fire type is that it's a game where the enemy doesn't have a lot of good moves. And that combined with the fact that Charizard and Arcanine are actually really good just on stats alone, it's pretty much the only thing that stops fire type from being absolutely useless. Now, you may not have known this, but guess what? You signed up for an extra special video because we're doing a tier list, and our final verdict for fire type in the Generation 1 games has us placing it in the D tier. Generation 2. Gold, Silver, and Crystal. I find that the limited number of fire types in Generation 2 is often overlooked compared to Generation 4 or even 3 for that matter. In Silver version, you can catch a Vulpix on Route 36 and 7, while Gold version gives you Growlithe. The best part being that the Firestone is only available in the post-game, so you can't actually really use these Pokemon to become champion. And so outside of the starter Cyndaquil, the only other non-legendary fire type in the game is Magmar. Now, fortunately, in Crystal, you can now get an earlier Growlithe from a freshly planted patch of grass on the Violet Side City of Route 36. And with the Firestone given out by Alan Schoolboy on that exact same route just a little bit later, you can actually get an Arcanine and Flareon for that matter before the post-game. Also, please, just a moment of respect for Ninetales enjoyers. Vulpix is not in the game. Crystal also has a super small chance to get a Magmar through the Odd Egg, but it's so inconsistent, it's not something you can really count on a playthrough for. Oh, and lastly, in all 3 games, you can pick up a super underleveled Ponyta right before the league. Are we really counting that? Like, what are we gonna do? Fire spin the Dragonite? So basically, our Johto Fire options are Typhlosion, Magmar in Gold and Silver, or Arcanine and Flareon in Crystal. And I guess you can also do a fairly easy Master Ball on Entei before the league, or maybe just catch Ho-Oh if you're playing Gold. But the question now that we have to answer is, how do the fire types actually do in Johto? Well, to start off, both Cyndaquil and Crystal's Growlithe are actually pretty terrible for the first gym. Faulkner may be flying type, but unfortunately his specialty move is ground. There is one big redeeming factor for fire types in Johto, and that is actually Sprout Tower. Now in the Gen 2 games, you're not forced to go through here, so it's really just additional XP for your fire type, but it is a very good training ground for your fire type, and I think that gives it an advantage overall. And this leads us into the second gym, Bugsy, where Cyndaquil's evolution takes place at just level 14, and Quilava can actually solo him. Fire type unfortunately falls off a bit from here though. Whitney's Miltank has rock type rollout, which makes her fire type all but useless. Fire type is then neutral for Morty, and while it's got a disadvantage against Chuck's Poliwrath, it is actually pretty solid against Price's Ace Piloswine, since hilariously, it has no ground moves. It's also really good against Jasmine's Steel Magnemites and Steelix. Steelix also has no ground moves. Oh, and lastly, fire type is really bad for Claire. Now, as far as the league goes, it's actually pretty decent. It's actually great for the first Elite Four member Will, since he has a Jinx and Exeggutor. It's pretty fine for Koga, and it also has a super effective matchup against Karen's Vileplume. Unfortunately though, Johto does the thing where it's like the Gym 8 and final like champion are the same type, and it makes, it's Lance, he uses dragons, and fire type is really bad here. And then as for Kanto, I mean, pretty much every gym leader but Blue is just a wash. Fire type is decent for Blue, decent for Red, but not monumentally important either. So with all that said and done, where does this place Johto? As a whole, I would say that fire type is actually quite useful. The bigger issue is that there's just not a lot of fire Pokemon, and even the ones you get aren't really all that good. Like, you're not really getting Ho-Oh and Entei until the 7th and 8th badge, so they're not around long enough to really contribute. Ponyta and Flareon are also pretty much useless. Vulpix is entirely out of the picture. So your options are basically like a flame-wheeling Arcanine, a fire-punching Magmar, or the starter. So with all that considered, being pretty much carried by Typhlosion alone, I'm gonna give Gen 2's Johto a B-. Generation 3. Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. Oh boy, guys, look, it's time for the water region. I'm sure that fire type is gonna be really useful here. So fire type is, once again, quite limited in Generation 3. Just ask Team Magma, who use Pokemon such as Zubat, that's been standing in the sun all day, mildly sweaty Poochyena, a Baltoy that ate one too many spicy peppers. Oh, and wow, guys, look, Numel and Camerupt, actual fire type Pokemon. Now, our starter in Hoenn is the lovely Torchic, which, boy oh boy, you better be scheduling this thing regular massages, because it is carrying the entire fire type on its back. After the choice of Torchic, the next fire type doesn't appear until after Gym 3. You've got the single stager Torkoal along with Numel and Fiery Pass, and then right after this on Route 13, there's one more brand new, never before ever seen, definitely Generation 3 fire type, Slugma. Oh, and if you really hate yourself, there's also Vulpix basically after the 6th gym. Now, let's run through the game to see how these Pokemon actually hold up. Fire type itself matches up horribly against the first gym's rock type, and honestly, I don't know if I really love the argument that Combuskin can solo Roxanne. Like, yes, it is a fire type contributing to a gym, so you can't say that that's nothing, but it's more just the fact that fire type hitched itself to fighting type. And as for Brawly, fighting type once again carries the line. Like, why use Ember and Peck when double kick is stronger than both of these moves? And it's really only at the third gym where we see fire finally start to contribute. Oh, wait, what's that? Oh, here, 1 second, I'm getting a call. Hey, what's up? Oh, wait, what's that? Double kick does more than Ember against Magneton? And you're saying it doesn't matter that Magneton has high defense because Combusken only has Ember at this point. Till level 36? Well, can't I just get Flamethrower from the game corner? $80,000? Oh, well, that was a very unfortunate call. Indeed. So yeah, once again, fire type isn't actually useful here. And we see the same thing for the Flannery fight where fire type is once again bad. Now, the one big nice thing at this point is after beating Flannery, you do at least get access to Overheat, which gives fire like just really, really solid damage. But fire doesn't do a ton for the rest of the game either. You've got normal followed by flying, then psychic, and then finally water. So while fighting is nice for Norman, it then becomes a big issue for the endgame. And as for the other fire types, they're honestly doing even worse. Numel and Camerupt are extremely slow, so no matter what move you give them, they're going to go second and get one shot by a 4-time super effective move. Slugma is, oh my god, so bad. Like in Emerald Legacy, we gave it an ability that gives it an 8 times resistance to water, and it's still terrible. And that basically only leaves us with Torkoal, which is actually kind of decent. It gets the benefit of coming with all its stats at once, so you don't have to train it up, and it's also the first Pokemon to learn Flamethrower at a reasonable level. It also has Body Slam, which is just a move that is useful forever. So Torkoal's actually pretty good, and honestly, had this thing been in Johto, it would be a top tier Pokemon. And then lastly, again, Vulpix is just not really doing anything for the last 2 gym leaders. This then brings us to the Elite Four. Now, fire types go pretty hard against Sydney since he has 2 grass Pokemon. Phoebe's ghosts are neutral, and then the Glacia fight is pretty mid. She does have 2 Glalie, so fire is definitely contributing, but again, because she has water Pokemon, it's not the pure sweep that you'd probably like. Oh, and then look, it's another dragon type specialist here to stomp all over your dreams. Now, a lot of people like to say that while yes, fire type isn't that great for the league, if you're a Ruby and Sapphire player, it's really good for Steven. Obviously, it's terrible in Emerald for the water specialist Wallace, but people love to hold on to the fact that it's good for Steven. And to those people, I just have to ask, like, where is it good for Steven? Okay, sure, fire type is really good for his lead Skarmory, which can be a tricky Pokemon to deal with. But then you have Cradily and Armaldo, which are rock types that know ancient power. Claydol has Earthquake, Aggron has Earthquake, and Metagross, the only other Pokemon it's actually strong against, also has Earthquake. Also, like, look at these stats. I'm sorry, but your fire type is not making it out alive against Metagross. Okay, we need to bring it back to the question we're trying to answer. Fire type likes to pretend that it is this quintessential type for team building through a Pokemon playthrough. Where in Hoenn is the necessity? Of the 32 gym leader Pokemon, fire is super effective against 3. Fire type is absolutely terrible in Hoenn, and the only thing that takes it out of the F tier is the fact that it managed to attach itself to Blaziken. So all things considered, I'm gonna give Hoenn our lowest score yet, D-. Now, the Kanto remakes managed to finally give fire types some good moves and show off their full potential. Vulpix gets Flamethrower at Erica's gym cap of 29, and Growlithe gets Flame Wheel at 31. Charmeleon is still unfortunately rocking Ember here, but it at least gets Flamethrower shortly after this at 34. Unfortunately, fire type is somehow actually in a worse spot than it was in the original Kanto games. And that's because opponents have also seen Learn Set upgrades. And this makes Giovanni, Lorelei, Bruno, Lance, and the champion much worse for fire types defensively. In Gen 1, you'd see Lorelei running Water Gun, and yeah, fire type is still not useful here, but it wasn't getting absolutely one-shot by everything. Now you have a bad offensive matchup, but all of those matchups also have moves to kill you. So in Fire Red and Leaf Green, fire is actually garbage. Fire type just provides no benefit that doesn't come with an absurd level of downside. And its better Pokemon can't even get by anymore because all the trainers now have good moves. So ladies and gentlemen, it is for that reason that I'm handing out the first F ranking for fire types in Fire Red and Leaf green. Generation 4. Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. Now, Diamond and Pearl are unique in having an absurdly low number of fire types, but it doesn't really affect the overall performance of the type. And that's really just because of Infernape. So once again, with a firefighting starter, the first gym being rock is obviously only hindered by a fire type. The second gym is then grass. Now, ghost type Fantina is the third or fourth gym, depending how you play, but regardless, it's a neutral matchup. Now, the next gym is fighting type Maylene, and fire types are actually really good here because her ace is a steel type Lucario. After that, it's Crash or Wake, which is obviously terrible. And then you've got Steel type Byron, who is probably one of the easiest gym leaders, and Fire type doesn't match up amazing into it. Okay, super effective against his first two Pokemon, just not Bastion on his ace. Now, after that, it's Ice type Candace, who obviously Fire type is amazing for, especially in Diamond and Pearl because she also has the Snover. And then the last gym is Electric, which is fine. Fire type absolutely cooks the first Elite Four member, who is Bug, but then struggles pretty hard against the second, who is Ground. The third is Fire, so this is neutral. And while the last Elite Four member Lucian is Psychic type, it's actually pretty useful because Bronzong is part Steel. And as far as Cynthia goes, you've got super effective coverage against her Lucario as well as her Roserade. So overall, I gotta say, Sinnoh really does cater to the fire types. The bigger question we need to ask is actually, how are the fire types? Well, in Diamond and Pearl, outside of Infernape, your only other option is Ponyta directly after the grass gym. And honestly, Ponyta is not that great. So basically you're relying on Infernape. And not only is Infernape the best starter, it's arguably the best Pokemon in the game. Half of that, however, has to do with the fact that it's also fighting type. Now, I think it's worth noting that in this case, that's not like a bad thing for fire. Fire happens to be very synergistic with fighting type, so that is overall a bonus for fire. The issue in Hoenn is that a lot of the time, Blaziken just feels like a fighting type that happens to also be fire and never uses fire, whereas here, Infernape actually, uses both of the types to its advantage. Regardless though, in Platinum, you get a lot more options. Ponyta now actually comes before Gardenia, so it can actually be useful. It also gets early Flame Wheel that really helps it out. There's also Magmar available in Fuego Ironworks, and it now gets a third stage evolution, Magmortar, which is really strong. You can also get a free Eevee in Hearthome and evolve it not too long after this from the Salacian Ruins. And Houndour is available on Route 214, unfortunately just before the Maylene fight. So overall, I would say it's really Houndoom, Magmortar, and Infernape that are carrying fire type here. Even now that we have the physical special split, Flareon is just too slow and doesn't learn good moves to really be that useful, and Ponyta doesn't evolve until level 40. So overall, through giving us more fire types, I think Platinum shows just how good the type itself actually is. All things considered, I think fire type is really good, but not quite essential. So I'm gonna give it a ranking of B+. So the big thing in the remakes is that fire Pokemon actually now get pretty good moves, and allowing all these fire types to actually live up to their potential shows you how good fire types are in Johto. Sprout Tower is now required, so fire type makes for an amazing early game. And outside of Claire the Champion, it's just a very useful type overall. And so all things considered, it's a huge glow up for the fire type, and I'm gonna give it an A-. Generation 5. Black and White. So Unova is not overtly friendly to the fire type, but there are some fire type Pokemon in this game that are so good, they just kind of make fire type good as a whole. Now, looking at type matchups, the first gym always gives you a gym leader that is super effective against your starter, which means Pignite will never have a good matchup. In the case you pick Oshawott, however, you can get a Pansear on a nearby route to deal with Sylvan's Pansage. It's not a very good long-term option though, so you're better off not putting too much worry into the first gym. And instead, you'll want to think about the best long-term play, which for a starter is probably Tepig. Now, once again, we're dealing with a fire fighting type, so it's important to not forget how much fighting type helps synergize with fire. But regardless, Emboar is really good, and the biggest thing going for it is probably its crazy high attack. The weird thing about these games, though, is that there's another fire type that is so good, it kind of hurts the case for actually going with Emboar. Available before the third gym is Darumaka. So Darumaka is pretty frail, but it's got good fire moves like Fang and Punch for the early game, and its 90 attack stat ensures it can contribute up to its evolution. At level 33, it also gets Flare Blitz, which is its best move. Darmanitan evolves at level 35 and is possibly the most broken Pokemon in the series. This thing gets the ability Sheer Force, which removes secondary effects but gives the move an extra 30% damage. So Flare Blitz, for example, loses its chance to burn the opponent, but goes from 120 power to 156. Darmanitan also has 140 attack. So like with stab, you've got a 236 base power move on 140 attack. Darmanitan basically one-shots anything that doesn't resist it. It is just honestly stupid how good this thing is. Now, this thing just kind of sucks all the oxygen out of the room, but it's also not the only good fire type. Chandeler's got a lot going for it and is also arguably the coolest fire type in this generation. The big issue with the line though is that you don't get it until after the 6th gym. It comes at max level 29 and its second stage evolution doesn't even come until level 41 when you can then instantly evolve it. It's awesome. It's just like, again, it's not really contributing until like level 41. Now, outside of this, we've also got the Pokemon Heatmore, which honestly feels like some cruel joke. It is worse than every other fire type, a single stage evolution, and locked in Victory Road. And then there's also Volcarona, but that's not going to evolve until the post game. So all things considered, you've basically got Emboar and Darmanitan. And since there's not a lot of other good water Pokemon in this game, you're probably best with picking Samurott and then going with Darmanitan. Regardless though, let's see how fire types perform from the 3rd gym and on. Because the first time the fire type really makes itself useful is for Berg, the 3rd gym leader. And both Pignite and Darumaka are great here. His Dwebble is part rock type, so he doesn't take super effective damage, but his Ace Levany takes 4-time damage with bug and grass, so fire obviously cooks him. Now, from here, you've got electric type, where Pignite's fighting is actually an issue against Elise's Emolgas. And then after this, you're fighting ground user Clay, which you're probably still not going to be evolved into Darmanitan, and even if you were, Excadrill's probably outspeeding you. After that, it's Skyla, where Pignite suffers again due to its fighting type. Brace is also water though, so Darumaka doesn't do very good here either. The 7th gym, however, is really nice, with Bryson being an ice specialist who might just go down in 3 shots from a fire type. But then sadly, the last gym is Dragon, so fire is bad here again. And fire doesn't really do much for the Elite Four either. It's actually super bad for Ghost user Chantal, who has ground, water, and fire secondary types herself. And it takes the weakness from Grimsley's Crocodile for an advantage over his steel type Bisharp. Caitlin's Psychic, so sure, whatever, if you chose Darmanitan. And then unfortunately, Marshall's fighting types will mess you up with their really good coverage moves. Now, N does have a Vanillix and Klinklang, so fire is useful here, and Getsus also has a Bisharp, so it finishes decently, but as a whole, I just think that fire type is getting carried really hard by Darmanitan. Emboar is really good, fire fighting is also really good, but it just doesn't seem to match up as good as you would hope. It's also easy to forget how frail Darumaka is for its earlier training arc. So despite some really good performances, I just can't help but feel like fire type is not that essential. So being very hard carry by late game Darmanitan, I'm going to give Black and White's fire type a C overall. Now in the sequels, the fire type does actually start out a little bit better. You no longer have a bad matchup against the 1st gym, and the 2nd gym leader is now Roxy, who has a Whirlipede Ace. Now Clay still has an Excadrill, and while it has Sand Force instead of Sand Rush, it still has a lot of speed, so probably wrecks most fire types. Flying Gym still has a Water Ace, and for number 7, you now have a Water Gym instead of an Ice Gym. Not to mention, the only super effective matchup in the league is against Grimsley's Bisharp. So overall, the matchup is a huge net negative. Emboar is still good, but in this case, probably strictly worse than Samurott. Simisear can't be caught until after the 4th gym as a rare encounter, which like, sure, you can do that, but the next gym is Clay and it's Simisear, so don't do that. To make matters even worse, Darumaka comes after the 3rd gym, so it can't help you out for Berg. Chandelure is still locked after the 5th gym, but with worse matchups than before, why would you want it now? Heatmore and Ninetales are also in the decks, but they're locked to post-game. You can, however, catch Growlithe before the 2nd gym to take advantage where fire actually becomes helpful, and you can even evolve it early for the stat boost, but this comes with the downside of losing Crunch and Flare Blitz. Still probably the best play though, because Arcanine can just use TMs and, is overall Arcanine. Magby also comes at the same place, and in this case, you're stuck with it until level 30, which is fine, I guess. You just need to have access to trading if you want to get Magmortar, which can come by the 6th gym. There's also Eevee, which is a gift in Castelia. You can get Flareon right away, which will also help with Berg. Unfortunately, It is Flareon, so you might not want to do that. Oh, almost forgot. There's also Camera, who actually just stopped by on vacation. He can be found after the 6th gym at a 5% encounter, but like, come on. The dude is on vacation. Just leave him alone. And so with all that considered, I think the only net positive for Black and White 2 is the existence of Volcarona. Can the wannabe legendary bug save fire type from the trash? Yeah. I think it does. It's available before the 6th gym, which is not amazing. It's got crazy stats, but its move pool keeps it balanced. And because it's a bug type, it actually stomps Grimsley and Caitlyn. So really the only thing that fire type has going for it here is, I guess, like a good early game matchup and Volcarona. So overall, I'm gonna give Black and White 2 a D+. Generation 6. X and Y. Now, I know I dunk on X and Y a lot, but guys, I gotta be honest, I was really impressed by just how good fire type is in this region. The first gym is Bug, with the ace having a weakness, and despite the second gym being Rock, the lead is Amora, so you can at least hit it for neutral damage. The third gym is Fighting, with just a single weakness to the ace's Rock Tomb, and then the fourth gym is Grass. So while you don't have the most crazy matchup, it's overall pretty favorable. The fifth gym leader then has a Magneton, and the fairy leader Valerie has the Mawile. Then after the psychic gym, your last fight is Wolfric, who is arguably the worst gym leader of all time, but that's very much in part due to the fact that his ice Pokemon are so weak to fire. Dude, Wolfric, man, he's... oh my god. Now, your Elite Four is then Fire and Steel, followed by Dragon and Water. So one good matchup, one resistance. That's really about the best you could hope for in an Elite Four. And then finally, Diantha has an Aurorus and Gourgeist, so Fire actually helps a decent bit here as well. It's best in the early game, but helpful almost everywhere. And the really big thing for Fire type is that it just like never matches up that bad. Like, I think we're starting to see the picture with Fire type where the big issue is just the fact that it's got so many weaknesses. And so when the game unfavorably matches up to not allow it to take advantage of all its super effective matchups, well, fire type is just in a really bad spot. But this is an example where you just give a fire type like a few good matchups and let it just do neutral damage, and yeah, it does pretty good. Question we need to ask now is, do Kalos's fire types do good? Well, to begin, the starter Delphox is okay. It's really good for the early game, but Greninja is always going to be better, especially in the long run. You also have the free Charizard, which is probably the best option of the 3 starters. Fire Flying does have a lot of overlap in what it's super effective against, but Charizard is fast and strong, and it mega evolves to either get Dragon typing or Drought, which is amazing. There's also the iconic Fletchling on Route 2 and 3, tragically overshadowed by Charizard. I gotta say, I am a really big fan of this line. It's pretty good, and it's personally like one of my favorite regional birds. It's just outclassed. But listen, at the end of the day, I mean, fire types, they're all on the same team here, so it's still a win for fire type. You can also get Panseer before the first gym, but like, why would you? There's also normal fire type Pyroar available before the first gym with a level 35 evolution. It realistically serves the same purpose as Simisear, but without being able to evolve after the first gym and with a worse learn set. It's kind of crazy when you think about the design of this game, like Simisear and Charizard just completely overshadowing the Gen 6 fire types. There's also Houndour available before the third gym. Oh man, no, God, no. Okay, I was just recently made aware of this insane fact. The Houndour Megastone is exclusive to Y, but Houndour is exclusive to X. Yeah, dude, it's like even a time where we finally have something good to say about Kalos, it's like it has to dunk on itself. It doesn't want to be loved. Anyway, moving on. We've also got Flareon. It's Flareon, guys. He's here again. Doesn't really have good moves, but it's Flareon. Torkoal's here too. Unfortunately locked to the 8th gym. Just another one where it's like, why? There's also Heatmore at a 1% encounter rate. It's like, I was excited and now I'm so defeated. Lastly, we do also have Chandelure. Litwick comes in the Lost Hotel, which is sadly after the 6th gym, but unlike Gen 5, it comes at level 37 to 8, so that's only a few levels before its 2nd stage evolution, and you already have access to the Dusk Stone. And I mean, with Fire Ghost typing, it is, as you would expect, really good. So I guess like Chandelure being good in Gen 6 is sort of the one silver lining that I can take from this really just like incredibly sad cast. But again, honestly, all that doesn't really matter because Charizard is really good. Delphox is also pretty good. And Kalos' structure just is designed for fire types to excel. I mean, the Evil Team even has a bunch of fire type Pokemon, so like you resist all them. It's just like a pretty good time for fire types. So I'm gonna go ahead and give Kalos fire types a B. Now, Auras is pretty much the same as Gen 3 outside of one small thing. That is Mega Blaziken. You thought Torchic was carrying fire types in Gen 3? Mega Blaziken has the world's largest backpack and he said, yo, fire types, get in, we're about to cook. You also have access to Mega Camera Up for Maxi in Omega Ruby. No. And also outside of Mega Blaziken, I mean, it's still Hoenn. I mean, God, even Team Magma now actually have water moves. So unfortunately, fire type as a whole is still really bad here. That said, I think Mega Blaziken is awesome enough that will raise it from the D tier up to C-. 7.8 out of 10. Generation 7, Sun, Moon, and Ultra Sun and Moon. Now moving on to the Alola games, our focus shifts towards the trials, but there's also the Grand Trials and Elite Four. The hardest trial in this game is by far the Lurantis one, where fire types genuinely are the best type, because not only is fire type super effective against Lurantis, but its partners also try to set up the Sun, which just further help fire type. The trial after this is also Vikavolt, which is a bug, so that's nice too. But after this, fire type pretty much struggles or goes neutral to everything else in the game, and it's not good. Grand Trials are Fighting, then Rock, Dark with a ground type Crocodile, and finally just Ground. It's also not super great for the Elite Four, but kind of manages to find little pockets to help out for. Like it covers Delmise and Frostlass for one fight, Skarmory on another one. Also Alolan Ninetales and Magnezone for the champion fight. And pretty much everything stays the same in Ultra, except for the fact that they actually add a Steel type Elite Four member. That's obviously a huge bonus for fire type, but this also caused them to remove Kahili's Skarmory, and now How is the champion, so there's nothing that fire type really does for this fight. But Alola is also home to VGC's greatest Pokemon of all time, Wolfie's Nightmare Incineroar. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, how do the fire types actually do? Now, unfortunately, Incineroar's great use is really limited to VGC. Everything that makes it so good in a doubles format just isn't really that useful in singles, which, don't get me wrong, it's undoubtedly a good Pokemon, but it's not even the best starter in the game. So like, yeah, sorry. Or maybe if you're Wolfie, that's a good thing. I don't know. Anyway, there's also the ever reliable Growlithe. Growlithe comes on Route 2 with the Firestone before the second Grand Trial. Now, if you evolve it early, you'll miss out on some good moves, but eventually TMs will pick up and it will be good. It's Arcanine. Eevee also comes on Route 4, so you can get Flareon. There's also Oricorio, which you don't get the fire type fail style until just before the third Grand Trial, which is equivalently like the 6th or 7th gym. And it only gets its fire move Revelation Dance at level 40. There's also Talonflame back again. You can get one at Well of Volcano Park as well as Route 8 in Ultra Sun and Moon. This is at the Alolan Marowak trial, so it's kind of late, but Talonflame is once again solid if you give it fire TMs. Personally, I think Salazzle is a very neat fire type. Unfortunately, it comes at the same time as Talonflame, and Poison is just strictly less useful than Flying. Alolan Marowak is another Pokemon that comes at this time. This also completely overshadows Salazzle, and Fire Ghost is really awesome. I think the big issue for this line is just that it's pretty slow. There's also Magmortar, again in Wella Volcano Park. I guess technically you can get a Magmar early through SOS chaining, but that's unlikely. There's Torkoal, which comes on Route 12 before the 5th trial. And what's so funny is all the like post-Hoenn games, they throw in Torkoal at the very end when it's just not good. The big thing for it in Generation 7 is it now finally has dropped. So it has a niche as like a late game add into your team. Torkoal is not amazing, but if you're running a Sun team, you probably want to use it, and I suppose that is overall a plus for fire types. And lastly, we have Turtonator. As a Sun Ultra Sun exclusive on Blush Mountain, again, quite late. This is a mixed attacking bulky dragon that is okay. It comes a bit underleveled, but it does come with Flamethrower, and honestly, dragon typing is really good always. But I honestly just can't help but feel like it comes way too late to really make a huge contribution. So overall, the fire types of Alola are dare I say, painfully mid. There's a lot of decent ones that come late, and so once again, you're kind of just relying on early Arcanine and Incineroar. And so pairing that with a just so-so matchup for all of these games, it doesn't matter really which one. I think it all just falls into the C tier. Now, as far as the Let's Go games go, things really don't change enough from Fire Red, Leaf Green for the fire type to be any better. Opponents have more coverage and fire is just not really useful here. So once again, it's straight to the F tier. Generation 8. Sword and Shield. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, finally, after like 4 generations, we've hit a place that is just nothing but kind to the fire type. Fire type as a whole is in a good position, but there are a select few Pokemon that are just absolutely nuts. Now, the big thing for fire types is that it does depend on the game you actually pick. Your good matchups include the first gym, which is grass, and you at least resist the stab moves of the second gym. There's the 5th gym leader Opal's Mawile, and if you go with shield, rather than fighting a rock gym, you actually fight an ice gym. So it's just like a huge net positive for fire types. As far as bad matchups go, you've got Nessa's water types and Rayhan's ground types, which unfortunately you'll be fighting both up twice since they're also in the Champion Cup thing. It's the Champion Cup? I think it's Champion Cup. So anyway, the point is that the matchups are decent, especially if you're playing Shield, but regardless, Fire just hard carries this entire game. Cinderace is the region's best starter, and I think by all measures is probably the best Pokemon in the game. It has 116 attack, which is the 4th highest of any starter ever. And unlike the 3 that are higher than it, that being Blaziken, Emboar, and Rillaboom, it also has 119 speed, which makes it like the 5th fastest starter. Its early game is really nice with double kick, and more importantly, on its final evolution, it gets a move that would make Darmanitan blush. Pyro Ball is Cinderace's signature move, which has 120 power with 90 accuracy. It also has a 10% chance to burn, and that's it. There's no like recoil downside. It's just raw damage. And this is effectively so strong that it doesn't really matter how fire type matches up. If you don't resist this move, you just die. But what's crazy is that's not even where fire type dominance ends. Because if you don't choose Cinderace, you also have access to Ninetales and Arcanine. So you can pick up a Firestone across the bridge in the wild area before the first gym. I actually made a video about this before I even started this channel on my old channel, like my main channel, SmithPlays. Possibly a lot of you guys don't even know about that, but yeah, whole other career over there. On that video where I was kind of starting to get into making Pokemon content, I talked about how like the first time you go into the wild, you can just get a Firestone and insta evolve these 2 Pokemon. But what's so crazy is that in these games, like a lot of the last ones, Arcanine and Ninetales have all their level up moves at level 1. And this is to prevent you from early evolving the Pokemon. But because this game has a move reminder in every single Poké Center, this is just absolutely busted. So you go ahead, you catch your level 10 Growlithe, and you can just evolve it right away. And then it just has instant access to Flare Blitz, Flamethrower, Play Rough, Crunch, and Extreme Speed. The exact same goes for Ninetales. So yes, there are other fire types, but they are all utterly outclassed by these big 3. There's Flareon. Now, despite what Volcarona might say, Centiskorch kind of proves that Firebug isn't really that good. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love the design of this Pokemon, but without Quiver Dance, Centiskorch just doesn't really live up to the hype of Bug Fire Pokemon. Colossal is another Pokemon that comes early and is a very bulky mixed attacker with a solid TM learn set. First evolution only has 240 base stats though, and it is also not resistant to the first gym's grass moves. It's also Fire Rock, so like, man, you really gotta like Colossal if you're gonna use it. You can also pick up a Litwick after the 3rd gym, but honestly, Chandelure works best as a late game pickup. It's kind of nice actually, is you can just go to the Lake of Outrage and just catch one at like level 56 for the end game. I feel like this is the first game where Chandelure actually works really well, and it's a good Pokemon despite being kind of late. There's also Salazzle, Torkoal, and Heatmore. You guys can go join Flare Flareon over in the corner. All of this talk doesn't matter, guys, because of those big three. Fire type has two cracked early Pokemon, and its starter is the best Pokemon in the entire game. So even though the matchups aren't that great for it, Fire type is amazing, and we're gonna place it very comfortably. Finally, it gets an A. Congratulations, Fire type. Now, as for Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, it's pretty much the exact same as Diamond and Platinum. They do add Magby and Houndoom to the underground, and so in that case, I think we'll just be generous and give it a B. As for Pokemon Legends Arceus, this is pretty hard to evaluate. Hisuian Arcanine is actually great, being able to use Rock type and stats, but unfortunately, Fire type doesn't do a whole lot. Fire type isn't good against any of the major trainer battles outside of Garrick and Irida. Like Cynthia, it does also help on Volo's Roserade and Lucario. As always though, this game is much different from the main line, so it's not something you want to put a lot of weight in. And finally, Generation 9. Scarlet and Violet. Now, as we look to the game that is currently last in the series, it's kind of hard to evaluate because you can technically get any Pokemon at any time if you're willing to go out of your way. But Fire type as a whole is very good. You have a Bug first gym and a Grass second gym. So Fire has a phenomenal start. Fire is then neutral to Iono and then bad against the Water gym. It's then neutral to the normal gym, neutral to Ghost, neutral to Psychic, and then obviously crushes Ice. It's bad for Rika, but wrecks Poppy. It's then neutral to Larry, but at least beats Tropius, who also conveniently sets Sunny Day for you. It's bad for Dragon, but can contribute against Flapple and Excalibur, and then Gita has a Go-Go, Avalugg, and King Gambit. So overall, it's actually pretty incredible in the league. Fire type is laid out to have a really good start and a really good end, and I think that's what makes it so nice. On top of the fact that it never really has to struggle that hard. More importantly, the type has got some really good Pokemon. The first being the game's fire starter, Skeledirge. I think to finally answer the question we posed at the start of this video, are you good because you're a starter or are you a starter because you're good? Skeledirge is in fact a starter because it's good. This thing is so good. My first playthrough of Gen 9 was with this thing, and I almost felt bad over just how strong Torch Song was for the endgame. Fire gives you a great start, but what is then so crazy is the way that Ghost interacts with it. It gives you immunity for both Larry fights, and then you get super effective coverage for the Ghost and Psychic gym as well. Skeledirge is arguably once again the best Pokemon in the game and pretty much hard carries Fire all on its own. And even if you don't want to go with Skeledirge, you've got access to another amazing Fire Ghost type. So you can get Charcadet right after leaving the main city, and it's okay enough to really help for the first two gyms. After the second gym, you can reliably evolve it and get those nice, juicy, high base stats. And regardless of which game you're playing, this thing is a monster. Ceruledge is probably better due to its Fire Ghost typing, but at the same time, Armarouge also probably has the better move with Fire type close combat, so it's just like two absolutely monstrous Fire type Pokemon, and the game doesn't even stop there. You can get Talonflame before the first gym, and while there are better options, it's still good. If you go back to the cave where the legendary saved you, you can get a Houndour before the first gym, and Dark type is arguably even better than Fire Ghost. There's also Colossal, which is probably just okay. There's Oricorio, Salazzle. Unfortunately, you can get a Camerupt right as you're heading to the Water gym. There's Flareon. Guys, help me out here. Torkoal comes probably way too late to be using, but again, it does have the ability Drought. Oh, and of course, there's Arcanine. Now, since TMs are easier to get here, Arcanine definitely is at an advantage, but because the Firestone is just after Lavencia, I don't really see why you'd go with this over Ceruledge or Armarouge. There's Pyroar, which is just getting totally outclassed because of its late evolution. There's the Blaze breed of Tauros, which is actually a very good Pokemon, just kind of hard to get. There's Rotom Heat. Oh, and don't forget Scovilla. This is a Pokemon that I'm a pretty big fan of, but it's probably worse than I think it is, but I just appreciate it for being so clever. This is a Fire Grass type with Chlorophyll, so it's obviously set for a Sun team. It definitely falls off kind of late and doesn't really come online until, again, you get the Firestone, but it's just a cool design and a pretty fun Pokemon to use. Larvesta is also a rare spawn in the desert. Its evolution is still at 59 though, so it's not really good for the Elite Four. The only thing I guess you can give it credit for is that if you're going for the Turosada ending, then it's good there. Still though, it's probably better to just use a fire type that can help you through the whole game. There's also Iron Moth, which is locked to kind of the post game. And I suppose there's also Chi-Yu. I mean, since you just need 8 stakes, technically you could just do this as early as you want. It's definitely one of the strongest legendaries in the series. So you'll have a pretty good time with this one. But I also don't know if we need to put that much weight in a legendary since, again, Skeledirge. Anyway, all things considered, guys, fire type, I'm gonna finally say it, cooks in Paldea. Oh man. Seriously though, you've got arguably the best matchup for fire types in the series. It is at least on par with every other game that gives fire type a good matchup. And this is kind of what puts it over Sword and Shield, which also has insanely good fire types, but just not as good of a matchup. So it's kind of crazy to say this, guys, but you know, we started this video asking, is fire type truly quintessential for a team? I want to hit back on that note, right? There is this idea that is perpetuated often through the rival that like you need this grass, water, fire core, and that's something that makes a really good team. I feel like if you were to just select a game randomly, you can opt to not use a fire type and you will be absolutely fine. As you can see, there's a few games where fire types stand out, but that is by no means common. With that said, I kind of feel like Paldea makes the fire type quintessential. It is always useful and you have a bunch of amazing options. So for that reason, I am really happy to go out on a high note here and give fire type in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet the first and only S tier ranking. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.